An essential part of any fandom, especially one that centers around a ship, is fan fiction. And I feel like that's most important in fandoms that are waiting for their ship to come canon, like Byler between Mike Wheeler and Will Byers. And AO3 have just released their top 100 all time ships, and Byler has finally made it in. Mike Wheeler and Will Byers have made it to the spot 94, which I think is pretty good considering we weren't even in there last year. And I think this shows just how much the fandom has grown and what importance it holds. So I think it's the perfect time to do a video explaining all of Byler fan fiction and everything you need to know for if you're a beginner, if you want to get into it, or if you're like me and you just like going over this stuff even though you pretty much know all of it anyway. I mainly just read fan fiction about Byler. I sort of sometimes go over to other ships, but that's my main. Once you find your ship that you want to read fan fiction about, there's no really deterring. And I have logged every fan fiction I've read since the start of 2024 because I'm definitely normal and I really like seeing all the fics I have read and I highlight my favourite ones. So I think that makes me qualified to talk about Byler fan fiction because I've read definitely over 100 by now. So this video is going to be in parts. First, I'm going to be going through the common tropes and themes within Byler fan fiction. I'm going to be splitting that up into categories. And then I'm going to go into the popular fan fictions within the fandom, ancient texts, if you will. And then the third section is me going through my favourites because, again, I feel like I'm well qualified to share. And I really had to whittle it down. It was really hard to choose my favourites. So the first category I will be going through is common themes and tropes within Byler fanfiction. So the first I need to categorize this section because there's just so much to go through is about Mike and the general tropes around him in fic. So Mike is usually headcanon as gay in fic, sometimes bi, it really depends on the writer, and usually he is very angry and defensive about this. That if there's one thing that Mike is going to be in fics, is going to be he has internalized homophobia and he goes through comp het so much, and I love these fics that go into it. I mean, you probably know because my most popular video about the queer coding and internalized homophobia of Mike Wheeler, obviously I'm going to love a fic about internalized homophobia in Mike. So usually he starts off a fic when he's still dating Elle. Sometimes he would have freshly broken up, or very occasionally they've never dated. That's usually in AUs when Mike and Will don't know each other. But usually Mike would have dated Elle at some point, and he is very much in denial about his feelings for Will. He doesn't want to talk about it, or he just doesn't know that he's in love with Will and sort of doesn't really know why he feels different about him. If he comes out, which he usually does, it's usually first to Nancy or Elle, and both of them will give him a good reception. Obviously, we don't want to be writing our favourite characters violently homophobic. And Mike's family is usually headcanon to be, well, his dad, Ted, is usually an asshole. He's the one member of the Wheeler family who is consistently bad in fic. Karen, it really depends. Sometimes she's written to be horrible, sort of on the same length as Ted, sort of wanting to keep Holly safe from like the gay agenda. But sometimes she's really supportive, sort of links back to that speech in season 1 where she told Mike that like she's here for him and everything. And then Nancy and Holly are always quite good because obviously we don't want to be writing our favourite characters again to be homophobic. It's quite funny with Mike because at the start of Strange Things between season 1 and 2, he was usually the one written with unrequited feelings for Will, which obviously the show has tipped in its head and made Will the one with supposedly unrequited feelings for Mike, which I don't believe. But if we're going with what the show's currently telling us, that's how it's going. And with Mike, usually the focus on relationships for him, Lucas, Dustin, Nancy, and Elle. Sometimes there's a friendship between Max because, I mean, personally, I love it as well. Max and Mike in canon don't really get on that well. But I feel like they'd be such good friends if they could just stop arguing for like 2 seconds. And Sometimes sort of we can see his relationship with Joyce and like Hopper. Hopper's quite a popular one, I feel like, because canonically Hopper really hates him, and there's like the trope that sort of he's annoyed that he seems to be dating all his children. Now we move on to Will and sort of the tropes around him in fanfiction. So obviously he's always written as gay because that's canon, and to do anything else would be kind of problematic. But he's very much more come to terms with it than Mike in that sense. Sometimes he'll be dealing with his internalized homophobia, but most of the time he's sort of at the point where he's accepted it and knows that that's just him and what's true to him. But he's very quiet, sensitive, sort of he has lashes out during fics a lot of the time, but sort of very the opposite to Mike in terms that he'll get angry. He won't usually do that, he'll bottle things up, which Byler fic writers love to push the angst so much. It's a bit of a warning for that. He usually has father issues because canonically Lonnie abuses him. And again, Byler fic writers love to go into that. He's traumatized from the bullying from middle school. And sort of usually Jonathan will help him through that. Other than Lonnie, his family is obviously great. You have Joyce and Jonathan. Often there'll be the Hopper's bias family connected together, and usually Will and Elle's relationship is really explored, as well as Will and Jonathan's. And sometimes, other than the party, Will's friendships will mainly be Max, because again, they don't really interact in canon, but I feel like they'd be such good friends, so I love reading their friendship. He has a friendship with Robin a lot of the time, mostly because they're both the canonically gay characters and they bond over that. And also with Eddie, because obviously he didn't get to know Eddie, but with his passion for D&D, and also because Eddie is obviously gay, there's been a lot of conversation about how we think that they'd be best friends. And again, I love, love, love reading that. And the last thing about Will is, especially recently, he's been written with getting powers. I think the rise of that is through the season 5 teasers, because it does look like it's more likely for him to get powers. And people love writing him and Ella sort of the Wonder Twins and them both having powers, which I do love. And I feel like is getting more common as season 5 approaches. So next we move on to the standard canon compliant fanfictions. So usually these can be split up into Fix It Fix for season 4, where usually the Fix It will be that Max is still alive and Mike and Elle broke up very soon after they got back to Hawkins, which means that Mike and Will can then work through their problems. There's usually a painting confession, which I will go more into that subgenre in a minute. But usually there's a painting confession, and usually they work through their problems, and by the end, they're together. Or is what people think is going to happen in season 5, which I love reading at the moment because I really obviously want season 5 to come right now. But for the moment, I like seeing what people think is going to happen. Usually, again, that consists of a Mike and Elle breakup. Max is still in a coma, so they're trying to work through that and see how they can wake her up. And again, Mike and Will are working for their problems. Usually Will is staying at the Wheelers because, again, we think this is going to happen in season 5, and it provides for more angst because we can get them constantly in the vicinity of each other and arguing. Or it will be post season 5 when the Upside Down is defeated, so we sort of see them just interacting in school as normal and the party having fun, but dealing with the trauma from the Upside Down. A very, very popular type of canon compliant fanfiction is the painting plot. So obviously, Will gives Mike the painting in season 4, and fic writers love to imagine what will happen in season 5 when Mike finds out the Will was lying. So usually it's in the example of what painting. So Mike will go to Elle, and during their breakup, usually, sometimes not, but he'll ask or like say, "Oh, thanks for the painting, like it meant a lot," and she says, "What painting?" And usually she doesn't even know what commissioned means. So Mike finds out through that Elle didn't ask Will to paint it. Or sometimes Elle will say something in passing like, "Oh, Will never let me look at his painting," or something like that along the lines that makes Mike think, "Oh, well, Elle didn't commission it." Or sometimes Mike will just guess on his own because he's a really smart character. So I feel like that's quite common for him to just figure it out on his own that Elle couldn't really be saying those things and it's from Will. Or sometimes Will admit it out of necessity, and that's only in the minority. He sort of very much doesn't want to admit it, and his life's purpose at the moment is fixing Mike and Elle's relationship. So I like all three of those options. My favorite is the what painting scenario. And Mike will have a different reaction a lot of the time. A lot of the time, he's really angry that Will's lied to him because, again, friends don't lie. And we know at the start of season 4, he was really angry with Will for lying to him. And truth is really important to him. Sometimes he's just really insecure that this means that none of this is true. And he's really upset that it's got to that point with Will that he feels like he has to lie to him. And sometimes he's sort of just like touched and wants to go straight to Will and admit his feelings because he's reached that point where he feels like he can admit his feelings. There are lots where Mike always wanted it to be from Will, which is, I think, my favourite scenario ever. But then we move on to basically all the gates being written about. These are usually one shots, and so you have birthday gate, letter gate, flicker gate, church gate, lover's late gate. They're probably the 5 that are written the most. I think letter gate is the one written about the most, like, out of all of those 5. Usually it's in a scenario where Will is staying with Mike and finds the letters accidentally. Or sometimes Mike will use the letters as a way to show Will that he really did care when he was away, or use it as a love confession instead, which such a sucker for. I love it so much. And then the other one that's used a lot is birthday gate. Usually it will either be in the context of Vecna making them all lose their memory and Will's POV with it all being angsty and like, oh my god, they all forgot about me, which is heartbreaking. Or sometimes it will be that Mike just forgot and he'll say something offhandedly about Will being 14, and then Jonathan will correct him saying he is 15, and then Mike feels guilty for the rest of the time, can't believe it's got to this point where he doesn't know his best friend and that well anymore and forgot his birthday, and it's kind of heartbreaking. Sometimes Mike will figure it out himself and again goes through the same process of, oh, I can't believe that I've done this, how could I ever do something to him. The next popular trope is one of them gets vecna'd, and this is probably my favourite out of all the types of Byler fanfiction because I love it so much and I love reading angst, and this is the proper angst peak. So, if it's Will, usually he will hide that he's getting targeted by Vecna from everyone because we know this boy hates being a burden and he doesn't want to bother anyone with even life-risking things. So usually his Vecna visions will be mostly about Mike. His guilt over liking Mike because Elle likes him and is in a relationship with him, and also because he's a boy and his internalized homophobia to do with that, and also the fact that he feels guilty because he knows that Mike doesn't like him back, and sort of the unrequited nature of that. Sometimes it's to do with Lonnie as well, to do with his dad and the abuse and all of that, and sort of, again, internalized homophobia and the homophobia from Lonnie from that a lot of the time. And usually his song to break him out will be either Boys Don't Cry by The Cure or Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash. But that's sort of quite almost controversial because a lot of people aren't sure whether it's been tainted by the Upside Down in season 1 and whether he would still like that song anyway. And then for Mike, he usually hides it as well. Sometimes he'll tell some others, but usually he definitely hides the nature of why he's being targeted because his trauma isn't as obvious as Will's, but he doesn't want to reveal that it's because he's got trauma from being gay and internalized homophobia. And then usually his focuses on his internalized homophobia, his feelings for Will being disgusted with him, Elle being disgusted with him, and sort of the guilt over being in a relationship with a girl when he doesn't want to be with a girl, and also sort of being disowned from his family a lot of the time in these situations. And his song is always Small Town Boy by Bronski Beat, because again, popular headcanon, my personal favourite headcanon maybe ever about Mike. And all the time, what breaks them out truly is the voice of each other, and they fall down into each other's arms. And usually this is what breaks them out of being stupid and not wanting to confess to the other, because they'll realize that they've just had a near-death experience and that they do love the other and they want to be open about it. Another one which is common within the season 5 plot is training like montages almost, with the party going to train to defeat Vecna, and Will, Nancy and Hopper are the only ones who know how to use a gun, so naturally they have to teach everyone else. And Mike doesn't even know that Will knows how to shoot a gun, and he watches him shoot a gun and he thinks it's hot, and he sort of usually has his gay realization at that point. He's sort of properly freaking out. And a lot of the time, will come help him shoot the gun, put his hands sort of like where they're supposed to. And it's just, usually this is like a one shot or like one chapter within a bigger fic that is about something else mostly. And I love it so much. I think it works so well. And then another thing to do with season 5 is about possession. So essentially, Will gets possessed just like he did in season 2, and Mike is the only one to truly notice because Will tries to hide it from everyone because, again, he doesn't want to be a burden. Usually, he doesn't get possessed like all the way, it's sort of just like halfway. I'm reading a fic at the moment called Am I Considered Your Dollhouse, which I feel like is quite popular at the moment, but is similar to this, that Vecna is in Will's thoughts, but he doesn't want to tell anybody because he doesn't want to be a burden or doesn't want to disrupt the plans to defeat Vecna. So I feel like this is an example of that. And usually Mike will figure it out and help him through it. Next, again, is sort of more of an instance within the fic, not just sort of the fic overall, or sometimes it's a one shot and it's either of the boys coming out to Elle. So usually it's Mike because Will, again, really doesn't want her to know because it's completely associated with him liking Mike, and he has guilt over that because Elle was going out with Mike. And usually he sort of only tells her this at the very like desperate time that he really has to and can't keep it in any longer. Usually Mike will come out to her during their mutual breakup. Sometimes she knows, sometimes she looks back on things and realizes how obvious it is, but usually she gives like such a warm reception to it and is very welcoming of their relationship and thinks that they go really well together, which I love. And usually Mike apologizes for how he was in the relationship and she understands why he acted that way. And a lot of the time, a common trope is that she doesn't know homophobia exists. So when Mike or Will get really emotional, obviously coming out, she's really, really confused because she's like, well, why isn't like I like boys? Like, I'm not really like sad about it. What are we doing here? Which is hilarious to me. And then the other character that gets brought up with Byler a lot is Holly, especially since we had that behind the scenes season 5 of them cycling her to school. So a lot of the time, Holly will clock them before anyone else does, or even before they do themselves and see that relationship, or she'll walk in on them like kissing and stuff, and it's sort of about them having to tell her that she really can't tell anyone, but she loves being in on the secret anyway. And Will is usually her favourite of Mike's friends, so she loves it and wants to spend all the time she can with Will. Next, we move on to situations that can happen in canon compliant. I mostly read them in canon compliant fics, but they can also happen elsewhere. So the first one is Byler prom. So this is usually post-canon if it is in a canon-compliant fic, and it's sort of all about whether they should ask the other one out. Mike has always broken up with Elle in this situation, and it's sort of dealt with years ago, really, so we don't need to worry about them. And they want to ask each other out, and the party gets so annoyed with them because it's so obvious that they like each other, but they can't make the move. Usually Mike is the one to ask because Will is adamant that Mike doesn't like him back at all, so Mike usually has to take the plunge. And a lot of the time they'll have matching corsages, even just like little socks. It depends what time this is set, because obviously in the 80s, like, you couldn't be as open as you can now if you're going with a boy. And if it is set in the 80s, then usually they will go off either outside or in a different room, which is a reference to Rebel Robin when she saw two boys dancing together in a different room, and they'll dance together. And it's really, really cute. And then the next scenario that can happen in canon compliant, but doesn't always have to, is them trying to hide that they're dating from the party. So again, this usually happens when it's set in the 80s. They're not sure who they can trust. They're pretty sure they can trust the party, but they want to hide it for a little bit longer. So it's sort of them having to hide their affection for each other in front of the party. Sometimes the party knows anyway, which I think is my favourite instance because it's hilarious at the end. For them to be like, we knew the entire time, why are you even bothering with this? And sometimes a few of them know. Usually if like one or two know, it's Elle or Max because they're the most perceptive. Dustin and Lucas sort of, it can fly them by. or sometimes none of them know. And then at the end, when they admit, like, oh, we've been dating the entire time, they're like, what? Sometimes, and I love this instance, it's they're trying to hide their dating whilst the party tries to get them together, and they don't realize that they're already dating. And then, in reference to their first kiss, a lot of people, me included, write an angsty first kiss with rain, and I love a rain kiss. I think it works so well, and it's perfect for them because it parallels the season 3 rain fight where Mike's like, it's not my fault you don't like girls. And I feel like that'd be a lovely full circle moment if it did happen in canon, but I love reading about it in fics. And also, I feel like a popular scenario for the first kiss is that Mike is one to kiss Will first, and then Will doesn't kiss back because he's shocked. So Mike freaks out, but then Will goes in for the next kiss, and that's how it works. And now we move on to AU. So obviously that's alternate universes. And I feel like these are also quite common with Byler because we don't want them to have as much angst as the show. So the first AU is no upside down. So I feel like this is quite a common one. Usually it happens when they're in school. So we just read the party doing lots of fun things. Mike and Will trying to deal with their issues. Sometimes they'll still have the same issues as they did with Mike and Elle dating, and then Mike and Will sort of having the distance between them after like season 3 timeline. And sometimes they won't know each other during school, so usually Mike is paired up with Lucas and Dustin if this is the case, and Will is paired up with Elle and Max, and either of these like groups don't really have much to do with each other, and then Mike and Will get to know each other and it brings the whole party together. The next AU, which is quite similar to this, is College Byler. So again, the characters will be aged up. Sometimes the party will all go to the same university. Sometimes the party will meet at university. Again, I know it's college in America, but I'm British, so I'm calling it university. And sometimes they'll meet there. A lot of the time, Byler are roommates, which again, they were roommates, and it works so well. And usually Mike's major is English. It usually his parents hate it. So sometimes he'll be written with like a business major that his dad's forced him to take. I've read that a few times. And very occasionally, sometimes he'll do drama. Sometimes his minor will be drama, major will be English, which I think is my personal headcanon for him. And then Will's is always art. I've never read another fic where he's done anything but art. You can pry art from his cold dead hands. Another AU, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be an AU, but I feel like I read it mostly in these, is fake dating. This is very explainable trope. Obviously, they start to fake date and then they eventually fall in love. I personally don't read many of these, but if there's any good ones, please comment below because I'm willing to try them. I think I like when I see the genuine feelings, but I do love seeing it grow. And then another common one is band AU. So usually Mike is the one in the band. Sometimes he's the lead singer. Sometimes he's the guitarist. I feel like I haven't seen him when he's the drummer or like bass player or anything. Usually that's someone else. And Will is usually someone who comes to watch and doesn't really know the band at first. Usually it's a small band. I feel like Mike is usually the one in the band just because Finn Wolfhard does music, so that makes it most explanatory. In the same way that Steve is in a band a lot in fics because Joe Keery, obviously, he has his music as well. And again, I've only read one fic, which I'll move on to in the popular fic section, that has included this trope, but I really liked it in that one, so I feel like I need to read more with this trope. And then next AU is the soulmate mark AU. So essentially, this is that Will and Mike live in a universe where you get a soulmate mark. So usually this is either your soulmate's name, your first words that you've said to your soulmate, or sort of what your soulmate draws on their skin and then it shows up on your skin. So sometimes they won't know each other, but I feel like most of the time they do know each other in this instance. And if they do, usually it's the first words that's said to them or their name. Usually it's only what they draw on their skin if they don't know each other. And usually Will get his verse on his 15th birthday, so it lines up with season 4 plot, or sometimes it'll be their 17th or 16th birthday, depends what the timeline is. And Will try to desperately hide his because he knows his is Mike, but he doesn't know whether it's reciprocated because in the universe it's not necessarily, soulmates aren't necessarily reciprocated in the same way. And then obviously Mike's soulmate will be Will, and he tries to hide that for as long as possible because usually he's still dating Elle in these sort of situations, and he's still very much in denial that he's gay and doesn't want to be with Will. Well, he does want to be with Will, but he sort of doesn't want to be with him in society's sense of the word. But then through the fic, they'll work things out, and Mike will reveal his soulmate Mark, and they'll reveal that they're destined to be together. And the last AU, and probably my favourite AU, is a Spider-Man AU. So basically, will be the Spider-Man because with his powers and things, it makes most sense. And Mike will be MJ because it's sort of headcanon that his full name is Michael James Wheeler, aka MJ. And usually they'll fall in love alongside real life versions and Spider-Man and MJ. Obviously, Mike doesn't know that Will is Spider-Man and sort of has the guilt of liking both of them, and then in the end obviously realizes that they're the same person. Usually Mike figures it out for himself because again he's a very smart dude, so sort of he can pick up on the hints. And I love reading this. A very popular example of this is Mike Wheeler's Guide to Falling in Love with a Superhero. Sorry, my notes down here, I had to check that name, but it's by Smooth Snoom, and I would really recommend it because it's really good. So that is all the tropes and themes common within Byler fanfiction. I think it's a really nice range of instances where Byler's written in. I think it works really well. So now let's move on to famous fanfictions. So these are fanfictions that are pretty well known within the fandom. Lots of people chat about them. So starting with, I'd say probably the most famous and my personal favourite, I've read it 2 times now, is Force of Gravity by Ocean Fruit. So this is an AU where Will is a jock, he's the captain of the football team, and he does the football team with Dustin, Lucas and Steve, and he's friends with Chrissy and Elle. And then Mike is in a band, he's a lead singer, and in the band is Max, Eddie and Robin. And both these groups hate each other because Eddie and Steve used to have like a thing going on, but then that ended horribly. And Mike and Will sort of slowly get to know each other, and Will sort of develops feelings. And then he finds out that Elle has a crush on Mike, and he has loads of guilt about that and tries to push Mike and Elle together. It's a really long fic, and it's honestly, you have to read it. This, out of all my recommendations, this is probably the one that you need to read the most because it really goes into Will's internalized homophobia and his relationship with his dad and the abuse he faced and sort of how he's having to deal with that. It's Will's POV, obviously, and it sort of goes more into his emotions because I feel like most fics I read, it goes more into Mike's emotions, and I feel like this is a really nice change. Then these next 2 I haven't read myself, but I've heard really, really good things about them, so I really need to get onto them. So the first one is A Cruel Summer with You, and that is written by And I Write or Die, Stroby, and Wise Atom. So this is an AU where both Mike and Will are camp counsellors, but also rivals. I read maybe the first 3 chapters in this actually. It's really good. I just sort of forgot about it, so I really need to get onto it. But essentially, sort of all our main characters are there, and it's just in a camp setting. And then the next one is Touch Like Velvet by, let me check my notes, Ciders. So again, I haven't read this one. I don't know much about it, but I've heard so many people go on about it, so I really want to read it. It looks like it's going to be quite sad, and also I think Lonnie is quite heavily involved, so again, that's going to be sad. And the summary for it, or sort of write up on AO3, which I thought I'd read out, is: It was easy for Will Byers to fall in love with Mike Wheeler. The trouble came when he had to pretend it wasn't real. So again, that sounds great. I'd recommend it because lots of people seem to love it. And then the last properly famous one is The Red Envelope. Now, this is a classic. This is the first Byler fic I ever read. Essentially, it is that Will writes down his feelings in a letter and says, meet me at Castle Byers if you want to give this a go on Saturday. If you don't, I'll never talk about this again. And he has no intention of sending it, and then Mike takes it. And it's all about how that plays out. It was written in 2018, so sort of post season 2, pre season 3. And again, from what I remember, because again, it was the first Byler fic I read, so it's quite a while ago, it was really good. And now it only seemed right if I gave my own personal recommendations. I've managed to whittle it down to 10 or 11. I'm going to try go through them as quickly as possible, but they are so good and I really recommend you read any of these. I'll link all of them in the description below. And most of the fics I read are canon compliant, so the majority of them are canon compliant. So the first 5 are canon compliant. So first we have Every Breaking Wave, Shipwrecked Souls. I have them all written down here, so if I'm looking down here, that's why. So this is by 815 in brackets, funky little idiot. So this is all about Will moving back from California and starting back at Hawkins High and dealing with the dynamics of the party and especially Mike. And Mike is going through a whole lot of emotions in this one, a lot of internalized homophobia. He starts dating Jennifer Hayes because he thinks that Will likes her, and it's a really, really interesting dynamic. And then we have A Body in Motion by Astrobi, who is one of the more popular Byler fanfiction writers, and I've read a bunch of their stuff, so definitely go check out any of their stuff, really. But this is my personal favourite of them. So it's a multiple chapter fic. It's the aftermath of season 4 and the season 5 plot, where the Byers are staying with the Wheelers and sort of how Mike and Will are slowly getting used to each other and Mike's feelings over what he's become and sort of dealing with having to go through this change to get back to who he was. And Jonathan's involved in it a lot, and I just think it's great because I love Mike and Jonathan interacting about Will. And then we have If This Is the End. This might be my favourite on the list. So this is by Gaze for Byler, and it's essentially that Will goes out for a walk from the Wheelers because he's just completely overwhelmed with staying in Mike's house. Mike sort of is following him around a lot, but whilst they're out for the walk, Mike follows him and they get attacked by a Demogorgon. Mike defends Will and loses an arm in the process and has to go to hospital. But before he does go to hospital, Will thinks he's dying and tells Mike how he feels. But he doesn't die, so the entire fic is him having to deal with the repercussions of that. And it's so good. It's if you read any on this list, read this one. And then after this is The Windows of This Love. So basically, Mike and Will rush into a relationship at the end of season 4, season 5, essentially whenever they defeated Vecna. So now they're not happy, and Will breaks up with Mike just before they go off to college, and they make an agreement that if they are better in 5 years and aren't dating anyone else, then they can get back together. Again, this is a sort of quite long, I don't think it's multi-chaptered, but there's a lot of words in it. And sort of seeing Mike's growth is in Mike's POV. There's also one in Will's POV that you can read, which I haven't read yet, but I do want to read. And again, just such a great read. And then the last in the canon compliant is Everywhere at the End of Time. This broke me. This is the only fic I've cried reading. Essentially, Mike and Will are the only ones left of the party. The others have moved on. But Will, due to the after effects of everything that happened to him, starts losing his memory. And it's all about sort of how Mike has to deal with that. There's a great animation that goes along with it, which I've watched so many times, which again I will link in the description below to go along with the fic. And then the next 3 are No Ups or Down. So first, I Never Find Out Till I'm Head Over Heels. This is by an orphan account, so you sort of have to filter it by the ship. So essentially this is Mike asks Will out for school dances for 5 years, but Will thinks it's a joke and sort of keeps, or sort of is out of pity, so keeps saying no and rearranges things for them to do on that night. And yeah, it's sort of that. I can't say any more about it because otherwise it will spoil it, but I'd really recommend you read that. And the next one is Fool Me Once by Queer Ex Queen. So this is about Mike and Will have grown apart, but then Will is up one night and Mike gets through his window, and sort of it's about them coming back together and understanding each other, and Mike having to get over his internalized homophobia. And the last one in this category is Need to Snow Basis, which is by Smooth Snoom, which is another really popular Byler fanfic writer and is really good. Again, check out any of their stuff, it's really good, I love it. So this is another where Mike tries to be incredibly obvious that he likes Will and asks him to the dance, but Will is in denial because Mike could never possibly like him, and sort of deals with all of that. And then the last 3 are AUs. So first we have The Evening Speaks by NB Future Boy, and this is Will stays up late to work on his art and listens to a radio show, a college radio show, and Mike is the presenter. And he decides to ring in one day and say that he doesn't like 80s music, and then Mike makes him a bet that he'll like an 80s song by the time that this music festival happens. Then the next one is another college AU called Take a Little Moment, in brackets, Find the Right Words. And this is by Astrobi. And this is about Mike and Will going to college together. They're not roommates, but they're with Lucas and Dustin in respective rooms. And sort of, they're pretty sure the other likes it. Lucas and Dustin are kind of screaming at the others to get a grip because they obviously like each other, but they're not quite sure what to do. And it's all about that unfolding. And then the last one is Say It With Your Hands, which is by Pseudologia. I don't know if I said that right. But this is Mike starts working at the movie theatre near him, and Will starts working there as well, and he gets obsessed with his hands and can't do his job properly. And this is a one shot, it's about 8,000 words, and lovely little read. And so this is my summary all about Byler fanfiction. I hope if you're a beginner, this really helps so you can get properly into Byler fanfiction, or even if you're like me and have been reading it for years, it's fun to go over and summarize. And please, if you have any recommendations for me, comment them below, because I need more fics to read, because I need to get through the wait to season 5. So thanks for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!